All right, welcome to Insights as a Service, episode 4. Today, I am joined by Nick Phillips. Nick, who are you?
I am the head of business for Lightwire, which is a trans-Tasman telco specializing in wholesale and channel.
With the sales pitch, or at least the advert pitch up front, aggressive, like it. Okay, cool. So instead of having an interview as part of this episode, we're going to be covering off on a bunch of news from around the industry and have a bit of a deep dive on industry awards and what they mean, if anything. And then next week, we'll have another interview. And then the week after that, we'll come back into news and opinion, and we'll keep alternating and see how the format goes down. But today, we're going to kick off with some news. So Nick, I'm thinking I might kick off with something I saw. It was probably actually a couple of weeks ago now. I'm just looking at the date. No, can't see the date, but it's certainly a couple of weeks ago. But still very, very interesting. And for context, I might actually read out what Philip Britt from Aussie Broadband said on LinkedIn, absolutely targeted at Telstra. So if you'll allow me, here it goes. You know you've made it when the 400-pound Telstra gorilla feels the need to create a comparison page. Shame some of their data isn't correct. Andrew Penn, tagged the CEO of Telstra. You might want to get your team to use current Netflix stats, and whilst they're updating, perhaps you add your product review rating of 1.7 stars versus our 4.5. Damn, snap. Interestingly, they don't compare any other providers. We'll take that compliment. Perhaps consider adding how much more expensive your plans are too. We were going to send you a legal letter like you do to us all the time, but figured this would be more efficient and cheaper. Initial thoughts on that broadside, Nick Phillips?
A hell of a lot more effective than using lawyers in the day and age. But man, that's pretty out there. I think what we have to do is go, why have Telstra suddenly gone and bullied? Because this is what it is. It's bullying. It's picking on one provider in a comparison and taking that to the market. Why have they done that? What are your thoughts on that?
Because Aussie's a real challenger, and with their recent approach, I think now it's actually binding offer for over the wire at $390 million. I think they're really rattling some cages. I think they're a genuine competitor, and Philip Britt and his marketing team are extremely capable and effective. But I think for me, the most interesting thing out of this is it's a really good lesson for marketers out there. My guess is Andrew Penn at Telstra didn't have any idea this thing existed. He's probably been caught off guard and then gone to his marketing team and gone, what the effing crap is this? But I guess some initial things are, don't be selective with your stats. Own where you fall short. If you're going to do a comparison page, people can just pick authenticity a mile away, and they've failed that test horribly. So some things, I actually saw a write-up about this on, I think it was Gizmodo, but I could be wrong. And it said, that Telstra's talking about giving a free router on 24 months, ignoring the fact that they don't let people bring their own routers, and ignoring the early termination charges that apply if you exit the term early within 24 months. They didn't mention price, as Philip Britt pointed out. No mention of Google review comparison. They were very selective with their speed stats. So again, people can be called out very easily when they're that selective, when they're essentially arguably misleading.
Yeah, the half-truths. Yeah, a comparison isn't complete unless the whole picture has been analyzed. Otherwise, it's leading on misleading, deceptive, unfair. But the consumer doesn't really have a choice into equally seeing the research that went in behind those statements that get made.
Do you think, though, comparison pages even work when you're as big as Telstra is, when you're the dominant player, or is it a play for smaller players? Because in this case, I think Telstra have given Aussie an unintended plug, right? It's only served to highlight the fact that they're a real challenger to Telstra because there's only one comparison page.
Complete backfire. I mean, I think comparison pages, they're traditionally used to either highlight a positive or a negative comparison, and when it's a large provider doing it, they're always going to highlight the negative over the smaller guys. But I think if you are a smaller company doing a comparison in the market, you want it to be as wide as possible, and you want it to look like how you're competing against the market. What are you doing better than them? Where are they perhaps stronger than you, but I don't see why you'd want to do it as the biggest guy in the room, unless you're going up against an equal size, Apple versus Samsung, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think don't target companies with high profiles. Well, with leaders who have a very high profile and are much loved. I think Philip Britt would fall into that category.
Mm-hmm.
He's always been really good at using social media. He's always been very active on Whirlpool, for example. He's not shied away from being upfront and honest. I remember seeing him a presentation by him at, I think, a Comms Day event in Sydney probably 4 years ago. And he was absolutely upfront. He said, look, we've got unprotected legs in our network. They're running pretty hot in terms of capacity, but the economics, the business case just does not stand up yet to add a very expensive protected leg to these links. Like, he's just not shied away from difficult conversations and being honest about the capabilities of his business. So he's very well placed to call bullshit on something like this.
Oh yeah. I mean, comparative advantage or comparative advertising is high risk, high return. I just can't work out what the return was going to be for Telstra for even doing this. It doesn't outweigh the risk.
Good point, and I think good place to finish off on that chat. So let's move on to another bit of news that I saw during the week, which is that Deloitte and KPMG are going to allow their Australian teams to work remotely, but not just remotely from overseas. And just a bit of detail on the offers. KPMG are offering 30 consecutive days, or I think, 6 weeks overseas. Deloitte hasn't locked down the exact offers yet, as they're working through tax and visa requirements, but expect more common destinations to be included in their offer. Initial thoughts, Nick, is there something that we're going to see across the board in the tech sector, and Deloitte really is in the tech sector nowadays?
Oh, we've had work from the office. We've all experienced work from home in one way, shape or form. This is the natural evolution. It's work from anywhere, right?
It is.
That's where the sector's heading.
It is. I think so. I've worked, I was very lucky about a year and a half, maybe 2 years into my role at Lightwire. I was able to work from France for, I think, about a month from memory. And it was a real experiment. And I guess some takeaways I had from that are, if you're in a customer facing job, it's actually really bloody difficult. It's easy if you're in a similar time zone, say somewhere in APAC, Asia Pacific, potentially, but Europe was a bit tough. Even if you have a job that really requires a fair amount of team interaction, being available first up in the morning, New Zealand or Australia time, last thing at evening, just to make sure you're checking in, you're available, getting through your tickets and your emails overnight, New Zealand time or Australian time. That was okay. But I guess my thoughts in retrospect are that I was able to be very reactive, and I did that pretty well. I certainly lost the ability to be proactive in a lot of cases. So for me, I'm kind of thinking that time zone dependent, it'll work fine, but that's probably, and role dependent, it'll work fine.
Definitely role dependent. I think, you could have a department of your finance team working, in a totally different time zone. But if you've got a sales force that need to be actively communicating with their client base, that's going to be a lot harder to manage.
I wonder if that'll make some roles more desirable going forward. If there's those sort of, roles where you aren't specifically customer facing, you're quite process driven. You just have to get through certain tasks each month. But because of that, you're able to work from wherever the hell you want.
Oh, transactional and metric driven roles are where this is going to absolutely shine. And that's probably played true for those who've worked pretty autonomously from home over the last kind of year or two with COVID.
We've definitely seen New Zealand and Australia just don't matter. We've had staff move from New Zealand to Australia and vice versa over the last couple of years, and that's no issue. I think it really only gets interesting when there is that time zone differential. Otherwise, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. Moving on, let's talk about more M&A activity. This one's less about a specific merger or acquisition, but more just about the volume of that activity across the Australia-New Zealand region, because apparently it equates to one deal every 52 hours over the last year. James Henderson at Reseller News reported that according to Tech Research Asia, which is TRA, I guess for short, their assessment, they were tracking completed deals in the public domain. The M&A deal count across Australia and New Zealand in 2021 currently stands at 140, comfortably surpassing total figures of 105 in 2020. So I guess your thoughts on what's driving this?
I think,
just to put you on the spot.
just put me on the spot. Love it. I think there's a lot of companies out there in a market where there is huge competition. There is probably too many players, and we're seeing the way to go forward, the way to get bigger and achieve their goals is to combine superpowers and essentially just become bigger behemoths and get that kind of market share, get that human capital. And to be honest, it's difficult in the marketplace to find good engineers in IT at the moment. And sometimes the easiest way to achieve that is to just merge companies and then get economies of scale.
So when you say there's too many players, you're thinking that there's not enough resource and too many people trying to do very similar things, hard to differentiate between what they're doing, and that's why you think there's too many.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's also out there's a lot of crappy companies floating around. Let's be honest, it's IT. Everyone's got a different way of doing the same thing, and there's those that have natural synergies between them where they are doing like for like, and they would get far greater return if those two companies joined together. And that's the other half that are merging. And part of those strategies there is that by getting rid of if you're the fourth and third largest competitor, you could probably jump to be the second or the first biggest competitor by combining and then really taking that top dog spot.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things as well. I think MSP telco crossover is seeing a lot of telcos buy MSPs and MSPs buy into telcos or merge. I think there's that, you've touched on it, that search for scale, particularly with labor shortfalls, with the cost of new technology adoption. I think there's also just a lot of companies flush with cash. There's cheap debt. If they're big enough to have strong debt facilities, if they're listed particularly, but even, private equity behind them, cash is cheaper than it's been historically, certainly in my lifetime. And that gives fuel for this kind of activity. But I think the other one, the less tangible one, and I've seen a bit of this, I don't know about you, you may have as well, but I think smaller business owners are really reassessing that grind during COVID. Like, what am I doing with my life? Is this what I want to sort of hang my hat on, just busting my ass to kind of make slightly more than I would in a day job? Is this really how I want to spend my life? And I've seen a few exits at least people looking for an exit off that basis.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that out there. And the other thing that just sprung into my head is that there's also those, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, looking to hop the Tasman. And they see the only way for them to grow is to move into different territory. And so you get those other M&A acquisitions going on so they can buy themselves into the market and be established at local industry know-how. But just going back to that kind of smaller organization there, yeah, I think there's a lot of tech companies out there that were particularly afraid. They had traditional models leveraged off hardware that just doesn't fly in the world of waiting 9 months for PCs to arrive and traditional servers and stuff like that. And those companies are ripe for picking because they've usually got a client base of some description, usually a director who's looking to sell, and they're pretty cheap sources for clients.
I was just thinking too that if you've got, a small to medium-sized business, they're facing a lot of very new challenges. Inflation's picking up, logistics issues. It takes longer to receive things, they're more expensive to source. It's hard, even if you're a really strong performer, even if you do everything right, it's getting quite hard at the moment to provide an exceptional service to your customers. So, bigger companies, those that have got large inventories on hand, don't mind having cash tied up in that inventory. They're a little bit better set potentially. So it's certainly, there's a lot of things in play that could probably drive someone to be looking for a bit of an exit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about how slow Australia is with its broadband, which is a topic near and dear to my heart, given I live here. And of course, that's not really a problem for you, as we'll see in a second. So yeah, Australia, 59th in the world, fixed broadband speeds with 82 megabits per second on average. This is fixed lines. As I said, they're fixed broadband speeds. NZ, on the other hand, is 24th with 179. That's more than double Australia's median speed. Still slower than I would have thought, though, for New Zealand, given Hyperfibre and 1 gig access pretty much everywhere. So interesting to see what might be driving that down. I'm thinking maybe just the higher price points of the plans that offer the greater speed.
Yeah, quite possibly, or just that it's there and we don't really see the need for it perhaps in the market. Perhaps that's what's holding us back. That is a weird one. I'm quite surprised New Zealand's 24th. I thought maybe top 10 for sure.
I thought top 10 as well, but maybe we're just a bit up ourselves. Don't know. People are going to be so confused. Where am I? I'm based in Australia, grew up in New Zealand. There you go. So kind of like to claim the best of both, and I'll pick New Zealand if I have to. All right. Monaco, Hong Kong, and Singapore were the top three out of interest. So tiny places.
Monaco's a surprising contender there.
And they're pretty cashed up and pretty
cashed
tiny.
Up for sure. But I guess perhaps there's a lot of investment bankers that want low latency, high speeds to the trading world from the super yachts. So
maybe. What's their population, like 10?
Maybe that's it. Maybe the visiting population's dropped right off, so they've been able to exponentially climb. Conspiracy theory.
Maybe. Yeah, diving deep into this one. All right, but I guess the follow-up point here, I guess, is that Labor in Australia plans to get 1.5 million homes connected with NBN fibre, which, again, on the face of it, great. They'll have faster speeds available to them. The flip side is if the price points are still fairly high for the faster plans, the uptake will still be low and the average probably won't climb by that much. So there's a bigger argument there just around affordability. And then behind that conversation, there's a big piece around the NBN model itself and the backhaul charging, the CVC, and that's been an industry bugbear forever since it was came into being. So we're not going to solve that in this conversation, but interesting at least to see NBN top of the pre-election talking points.
Look, I think it's always going to be a contentious topic in Australia for the next probably 2 decades. Good old NBN.
Yeah. By that point, all the copper that's terminating these services will be dead anyway. But okay, last thing I wanted to cover off on in news before I throw to you for any pieces you've brought along is the Aussie Broadband and Over the Wire acquisition. I should say the acquisition of Over the Wire by Aussie Broadband. I mentioned it earlier on in the piece, but it's taken another step. Initially, there was $275 million in cash and $40 million in shares offered. That obviously was kicked around a little bit, and now they've come out with a $390 million deal, according to a release from Over the Wire just before the weekend. So looks like it's happening. And I got to say, good result for Aussie, picking up a tier 1 voice carrier and a lot of enterprise grade business. Good result for Over the Wire, who have lacked genuine tier 1 access to the NBN network. So I think it's going to be pretty much a win-win. And if, Aussie Broadband can take that approach they've had all along to their portal, the automation, the insights, then I think that's going to bode pretty well for a combined entity.
I think if Telstra were worried and ready to do a comparative analysis to start off with, they're probably shitting bricks now.
Fair. I think the only thing, I think I mentioned it maybe last week before as well, is just Over the Wire have grown to be $100 million revenue entity through acquisition after acquisition after acquisition. A lot of them quite small acquisitions where they're less likely to have easily integrated elements to their businesses. So I do wonder about that burden cost, the cost of integration, how long it'll take and how long it'll take Aussie Broadband to realize this vision they've got for Over the Wire within their business.
Yeah, I mean, that was always Vocus's problem, right? It was technical debt from multiple layers of acquisition over the years that they kind of never sorted.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. What do you want to talk about?
I saw on the markets this week, actually, Hyperfibre tail extensions. Kind of relevant that we're 24th in the world, but Hyperfibre is New Zealand's, I guess, commodity 2, 4, and 8 gig symmetrical services that were released last year? Late last year?
Hyperfibre was last year. Yeah. I think. I want to say yes, but who knows? Time's a blur.
We'll roll with it. Progressively rolled out by different LFCs over the time. But tail extensions has been the one thing lacking and probably the single biggest reason UFB uptake really took off in New Zealand. Hat tip to NBN. If you want a good model to look at, it's tail extensions.
It definitely is, especially at the price points that they're offered at.
Yeah, so what does that mean for the market? We're going to see a lot more I guess, mid-sized telcos. I don't want to say small telcos, but mid-sized telcos getting access to not NBN, bloody hell, to Hyperfibre and hauling that traffic around the country. Obviously, previously they would have had to have a POP at one of or an interconnect with Telstra. Telstra. I am just full of Australia today.
You are all over the place. Which country are you in? I think so. So to really clarify that problem for anyone listening, not aware of how the New Zealand models work, UFB, when it was first introduced, ultra fast broadband, fiber to the premise everywhere, you had to initially have a point of presence in that local area where you would have a handover, and all services within that local area would go back to that point of presence. Then over time, they introduced, they being the carriers, particularly Chorus, who has the biggest market share, introduced these tail extensions. And at that point, you could bring the tails back to one of 5 points of interconnect. So most of the North Island could be brought back to either Auckland or Wellington, potentially Hamilton. The South Island was either Christchurch or Dunedin from memory. But when they brought in Hyperfibre, these new 10 gig access services, they did not offer that at all. So again, it was back to the old, you want it, you got to have a local presence. And now they've just released this model where I think there's Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch, or is it anywhere?
Auckland, Wellington for the 8 gig variant, but basically anywhere for the 2 and 4s.
Right. And the proposed costs, I mean, I can't remember them off the top of my head. What are they coming in at?
Oh, it's trivial. I think Inter Island was about $8.
Right, for a 4 gig service.
It was, from memory, flat rate.
Wow.
Regardless.
Okay. So the big question there for me, I'm sure you've got the same question, is contention ratios. What are they offering? What does the SLA look like behind it? And are we going to see these services, the experience on these services grind downwards?
And what effect will that have on the wider NBN network as well? But, time will tell. NBN. I think what this comes down to is Lightwire, where I work, has been doing a lot of growth in Australia, and clearly NBN has been front and center on a lot of proposals of late. So it's ingrained into me at the moment.
I respect how you turn that around into a good news story about Lightwire's growth across Australia.
Yeah.
But no, look, you're right. It is trivial. But I also wonder if if that contention model does become a problem, will the CIR component that is optional on some of these services become more interesting to guarantee, but it taps out at 100 megs on an 8 gig service. So it's kind of a
waste of time.
But it feels that way.
Yeah. I mean,
for the complexity involved.
Any business that needs, 2 gig of CIR is not going to be buying Hyperfibre.
No.
Plain and simple.
Anything else you would like to talk about before we move on to our opinion piece for the day?
No, let's launch into opinions, which is industry awards, I think.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk about industry awards. I got thinking about this the other day when yet again somebody else on my LinkedIn feed was talking about some awards they'd won, and I looked at the title of the award and I had no idea what the hell it was. Never heard of it. Probably will never hear of it again. But it was Focus from memory. And we constantly get requests to enter into awards at Lightwire, and I've entered into awards in the past. In fact, at the moment, I think our marketing team is entering us into one. Couldn't tell you what it is, which is kind of the point of this piece. What is the point of industry awards? Which ones matter? Which ones don't matter? And who really cares about the result? That's the point of this piece.
It's
any initial thoughts, Nick, before I launch in?
They are horrendously time consuming to A, put together your nominations for them, and B, I guess, actually attend because they are so volumetric at the moment. I think what we have last week, this week maybe, Microsoft had their industry awards. I think the Microsoft ones are probably, hold a little bit of weight in the industry. Obviously celebrating all their partners out there doing fantastic and great things. But we are seeing the likes of industry news providers that do their roundup awards every year, splitting those out against, it seems like there's a lot out there, and I couldn't hand on heart go, if I was to enter into one awards, which one would it be?
Yeah, I used to be a fairly big advocate of awards. I felt they had a pretty important place to play in a marketing strategy. You know, they're a low cost way to get quite a lot of exposure. At least they are, if that award means anything, which comes back to the whole problem. But I know Xero did it pretty well early on in the piece for them. You know, the famous New Zealand accountancy software business, they used to enter into pretty much everything, win all these awards for innovation and design and whatever else. And but that was probably 10 plus years ago. And I don't know, it feels like it's changed. I feel like, yeah, it's definitely changed. And I'm a big fan of social proof, right? Like I love giving people insights as to why we as a brand are different, why we're better. But I do think that having genuine people with genuine experiences, Google reviews, 5-star reviews left by actual users of a platform, rather than a panel of judges with God knows what criteria with an unknown brand behind them, I just don't know that it holds that social proof weight that it once did. And I guess the big question for me is, what are the awards recognizing? Like depending on the award, because you kind of got two types, right? You've got the award that is a panel of judges who receive these really long-winded submissions that you mentioned take forever, and they do. Try and think, what do we actually, maybe that's one of the benefits, is it forces you to look at what you do and how you do it, and do you really have a point of difference? But the other type is a pure voting one, right? Get all of your customers to vote for you in this format, which, and both have just really clear problems with them. How about you tell me what you think the problem is with each, and then I'll see if I agree.
Yeah, I think start with the second one there is that, if you have two companies, they both do equally great services, but one has got a bigger marketing budget than the other, and one is slightly more digitally engaged with their customers, they'll easily be able to upvote the other one.
Or just has more customers.
Or just has more customers. Again, skewing results. I think it needs, if you wanted it to be fair, you almost have to do some kind of revenue to customer ratio perhaps. Cap it on that. Who wins? I don't know. Kind of takes away from the whole voting process a little bit. Very democratic.
Yeah, I think regardless of whether it's a voting one or a panel, awards seem to be more of a recognition of the size of a company's marketing team and their ability to throw resource at creating compelling submissions. So, or creating a really compelling call to action for its customer base to go vote. Either way, it's a it's a question of marketing resource rather than genuine difference. And, I see companies that have terrible Google reviews, that have terrible perception generally, winning awards for customer service. And at that point, I'm like, who else entered that? That's the thing. Like, some of these awards are basically closed shops. It's a 2-horse race between two terrible options, and yet someone wins. I feel like maybe we're just on the inside too much. Maybe we've got a negative view of this and we're not aware of what it's like to be your average punter going to a website, seeing a shiny awards logo for something in 2020, customer service, something at some awards. Maybe it means something, but I don't know. For me, it's completely
getting out there, building the brand, getting known. And it's nice to celebrate this, your successes, because, I think New Zealand does a really bad job of knocking people down. But at the same time, there's a lot of companies out there doing really great things, dedicated, focused leadership teams that are just all about improving the customer experience. And it's not about how awesome we look to the market. It's about how do we actually deliver that to the market.
I think lists that rank businesses by growth are a bit different. Your fast 50s, your fast 100s. Now they can still be gamed, whether you're just acquiring someone that year and your growth looks amazing, whether you're starting from a really low base, so it's pretty easy to have 300% growth. There's a whole bunch of variables that ultimately can't really be ironed out in any meaningful way, but at least they give you a genuine, objective view of the growth rate of a business, or the financial success of a business, potentially, depending on the metric. So I have a bit of time for those. They're interesting. I don't know if they necessarily translate to customer outcomes, but often they may. So that's okay. For me, Google reviews, genuine case studies, testimonies, I think from real people, they still hold a hell of a lot of a weight. But I think if I had a message, I guess, for other brands with awards, it would be to be selective. I think there's some third-party awards still hold weight. You mentioned Microsoft. I think that's a good one. They own the ecosystem. If they say you get this award, you're partner of the year, you can pretty much guarantee, but behind that, you've got a lot of growth. You've probably got some really good case studies, some customers giving Microsoft good feedback, and you're doing something innovative. I think you can get something from that. I think when you say Choice in the consumer space have said that you've done something great, they're a consumer advocate. You can probably say that there's something behind that. But I mean, if you go out and Google industry awards 2022, tech industry awards, you're going to have something like 100 things pop up. They can't all mean something.
I agree. I think, touching on the panel ones now a bit more, is that the industry has so many, inverted commas, experts. There's not really many awards that are backed by panels of genuine leaders in the industries. And I think they're too subjective in terms of the voting criteria and who's reviewing it based off what agenda. I mean, look at New Zealand. It's a market of 2 degrees of separation. Everyone knows everyone, particularly in small industries like tech, where there's a lot of people who have worked with a lot of other people, and there's a lot of gripes. There's a lot of history there, right? And that's always going to play into, I think, reviewing nominations, regardless of whether you say there's a bias or not.
I think if I'm absolutely honest, we're entering an award category at the moment that I hadn't heard of until someone brought it to me a month or so ago. And if I'm honest about my driver for entering that, it's looking at the other brands that have won it previously. I'm going, hey, what? How are they winning? Like, it makes me just get massive FOMO and go, right, well, if they're capable of winning that, and I think objectively we're better than them, I want to win that. But will it shift the dial? Will the money spent on creating that submission, motivating our customer base to vote for us, will that actually have a return on investment? And I honestly don't think so, especially if you don't win, go to all that effort and still lose. And there's certainly at least one other company in that category which has a bigger customer base than us. So, I mean, I guess the flip side there is if we do win because we get more votes, it means that their customer base is very, disenfranchised, unmotivated, not big fans, which I guess would further highlight the case for us. But if we lose, then I'll just claim it's that bigger customer base. Yeah. Yeah. So look, I think ultimately it's, I guess the last point I'd make is I think sometimes, much like NPS can be, and that's a whole conversation for next time, I think it can really just be a way for people in management to pat themselves on the back. Like, how can they be winning things if they're doing a bad job, despite the fact that in isolation means very little? I think NPS can be the same sometimes, but it's a metric. It's part of, I guess, a series of ways that we can measure success that people, kind of cling to. And I think the bigger the company, the more common that is.
Yeah, I think, the bigger the company, the more their sales and marketing team is going to be split up, right? So they're going to have a brand element, and someone in there is going to have some KPIs around developing brand awareness. And what's the best way to develop brand awareness is you put a room full of people who are going to buy from you, and you make sure you blast it across every industry award out there. And they might have a bonus tied to that. So there's an incentive there for them to go and apply for every award under the sun, right?
You know what can be good though is the awards dinners. Good networking opportunity.
Oh yeah.
Good to catch up with some people from the industry you might not have seen for a while, but that's probably the part I don't mind. Is just catching up with people at those sorts of events. Not that we have many of those nowadays because COVID's a thing, but other than that. But yeah, look, I guess to finish off on that point, if you have won an industry award lately, congrats. Hope it's a good one. Hope it means something. Hope it drives business towards your organization.
Hope you celebrated it with your team.
Yeah, well, there is that. And look, maybe that's the key thing is maybe it's less about the customer base and more about creating an opportunity for your team to be recognized. Maybe it's more about internal focus than external focus. Maybe that's an element that I hadn't considered enough thinking about this space. But certainly I think there's probably more effective ways and ways that are less likely to, like, if your team's awesome and they're awesome, and you think an award is going to be the thing that shows that to the world, but then some panel that you've never met makes a decision that your team actually isn't as awesome as this other team from this other company because of reasons you'll never fully understand, or the other company has more customers and they outvote you, so their team apparently is better than your team. I'm not sure the risk is worthwhile in that scenario. Just tell your team they're awesome and go make it clear with your actions.
Yeah. Your customers will love you for it because it'll be directly translated into the service they experience.
Fair point. All right, I reckon we can leave that there. That's enough about industry awards for a lifetime. Nick, where can people find you?
Hey, they can check me out on LinkedIn, always available on there. Otherwise, you can drop me an email, nick@insightsasasurface.fm.
That's it. Hey, if they're trying to find you on LinkedIn, one Alan Phillips or two?
Who else? Two is always better than one.
Yeah, absolutely. With me, you can also get me on LinkedIn, Brendan Ritchie, nice and easy. Thank you to people that have reached out in the last week or two. Lots of really good ideas and advice. One of those actually was getting Nick on board and having a bit of a two-person format, hence giving it a go. And you can also get me at brendan@insightsasaservice.fm. Next week, we will be back with a weekly format now. Next week is an interview I did with Marcus and Roman from Virtuoso. Got a really great story, pretty unique. They kicked off in England and are coming into the NZ market, which is, I think, the only time I've heard of that in my time in the industry. And there's some really interesting insights there, and particularly doing it all during a time when England was absolutely ravaged with COVID. So lots of really interesting insights. Look forward to bringing that to you, and we'll catch you all again next week.